Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I complete my ranking of every episode from the ITV series Agatha Christie's Marple, starring Geraldine McEwen and Julia Mackenzie as our titular sleuth. In this video, I will rank all of the non-Marple novels adapted by the series. That consists of 9 non-Marple novels and 2 Miss Marple short stories. And this was a rough list to get through. By and large, these were not good episodes. Of the 11 adaptations in this list, I think 6 are outright atrocious and unwatchable, and the remaining 5 are passable, though I wouldn't be too eager to rewatch them again. I don't think any of them are superior in any way, shape, or form, but fair warning, spoilers ahead for both the original Christie works and the episodes. But we'll begin at the bottom, and it's a real shame that I can't place multiple of these episodes in the bottom slot because I don't think any of these deserve to be above any other one. But I did make a decision, and in last place, at number 11, I did put the one that I think bears the least resemblance to the original, and that is the Sitterford mystery. And this bears almost no resemblance whatsoever to the Christie novel. If I wasn't told this was the Sitterford mystery, I might not have known that, other than some vague references to character names. Captain Trevelyan is now a member of Parliament, set to become Prime Minister. He also has a shady past involving something that happened during an expedition to Egypt, and this is just all so ridiculous. He's basically a Tomb Raider now who committed some kind of evil deed in Egypt. It's not clear initially what this is, and this just plays into a number of ridiculous explorer and politician tropes. It's not original. I have no idea why they did any of these changes. Miss Marple could so easily have been inserted into the original story with just a few minimal changes. A number of characters and plot points have been cut, which I think is fine because the novel has a surplus of both. But the problem is they stuffed the story with new characters and new subplots for no reason whatsoever. The murderer has also changed. It is not the Major Burnaby counterpart, which I guess was to be expected given how the rest of the episode was going. The reason why I have this one last, and this again was a very tough choice with so many possibilities to pick from, is because I think it bears the least resemblance to the original novel, and I kept tuning out at points. Some things about this adaptation are just not clear to me because I couldn't make myself care to watch it, and I kept finding my mind going elsewhere. So I did place the Sitterford mystery in last place at number 11. At number 10, again, almost no resemblance to the original, although a tad more than the Sitterford mystery, and that is The Secret of Chimneys. And this was a very poor choice to insert Miss Marple into. Now, they do focus a lot more on chimneys and turn this into something of a traditional mystery, which is better suited for Miss Marple. But again, this adaptation has almost nothing in common with the original. Most of the action takes place at Chimneys, where a maid was murdered many years previously. There's also now a lot of hijinks involving the theft of a diamond. The present day victim is now one Count von Steinitz, who is a new character who wants to purchase chimneys. Again, I just really struggled to focus on this episode. It couldn't hold my attention. It was ridiculous from start to finish, and not in a good, like, train wrecky way where I couldn't turn away, but I just couldn't focus on this one. It contains some elements from the short story The Herb of Death as well, which makes me wonder why they just didn't adapt that story instead. In this episode's favor, I will say I think some of the characters are made more viable suspects. They do a fair, though not good job of making me believe anyone could have done it. It's more of a country house type mystery, but it does keep a lot of that thriller-esque vibes, which just don't work in the country house mystery. I don't understand why the show adapted this story when there were unadapted Miss Marple short stories still ago, and even other non-Marple novels they could have done. This episode is terrible, and it comes in here at number 10. At number 9, and you might sense a trend here, yet another episode that bears almost nothing to the original novel. Why didn't they ask Evans? And where do I begin with this one? A lot of characters were deleted, which is fine, but then they add some new ones. I just never understood why a series would delete characters only to add new ones. I don't like the complete morphing of other characters either, but at least keep them in the show. But this one has so many characters added, deleted, and changed completely that doesn't even feel like the original work. Badger, in particular, is a character I love from the novel whose absence I felt a lot here. The plot, at its bare bones, is still the same as the novel, which is why I did decide to put Why Didn't They Ask Evans above those other two adaptations, but you really have to dig around to get there. Miss Marple now pretends to be Bobby's nanny and does a lot of things that I just struggle to believe Miss Marple would actually do. The solution is mostly the same, but there are a lot of new pieces to it that weren't entirely clear or fleshed out to me from watching the episode. I feel like there were a lot of gaps left unfulfilled and unsolved. So, for all of those reasons, I put Why Didn't They Ask Evans here at number 9. At number 8 is another pretty bad one, and that is Murder is Easy. And this is another I contemplated putting in last place. And to be honest, I'm thinking this one is probably too high, but I can't place everything at the bottom. The plot of this one is sort of the same as the original novel. There are still all of these murders, but for me, the biggest knock against it is the removal of some pretty major characters from the book. Goran Whitfield is one of these characters who's not in the episode, and he was a major factor in the book. As a result, this means that Miss Wainfleet's motive is totally different, and it's truly awful. She is now a much younger woman who was raped by her mentally disabled brother and impregnated. That baby is now Bridget, whom she floated down the river in a basket like Moses. And as an adult, Bridget returns to Witchwood, and now Miss Wainfleet decides that she has to kill a whole bunch of people to keep her secret. And this is so bad. I have no idea what they were thinking with this. And I don't even understand why they changed the original novel so much. It was a country village mystery, which they could have easily inserted Miss Marple into. It's not like these previous episodes, which were more thrillery and did need to be rearranged for Miss Marple to seem at home. A lot of the victims and murder methods are different, and they are murdered in just completely unbelievable ways, like tampering with a gas mask. It was difficult for me to take this seriously, but the reason why I have it even this high on the list is because this adaptation at least kept my attention the entire time. I started dozing off in those previous episodes, and this one was at least interesting and crazy enough to keep me focused. Benedict Cumberbatch plays Luke, and he is not even that great in this, but he is probably the best thing about the episode. And I do think there is a strong argument for this one to be even lower on the list, but it's the fact that it kept my attention throughout that I placed it here at number 8. And we're still in the awful category here with number 7, and that is The Pale Horse. This one leaves out the recurring characters, which was to be expected. We don't have Ariane Oliver or the Despards, and this is felt. I think Mrs. Oliver was needed, as the new additional characters are just not interesting and bad stereotypes. Mark and Ginger have significantly smaller roles, which is fine, but Miss Marple doesn't work as a replacement for them. I don't like the changes made to either Zachariah Osborne, who is now named Paul, or Mr. Venables. Osborne was a pharmacist in the original, and that makes sense. It's a fitting occupation for this man and his murder scheme, but now his occupation is unknown, and it appears he's some kind of like salesperson rather than a pharmacist. Mr. Venables just seems like such a lackluster character in this version as well. I don't like that we were misled into believing he was faking his disability, because in the book, the point is driven home hard that he is not faking, which is a big clue that Osborne is the mastermind. The reason why I have the Pale Horse even this high is that I think more than any I've talked about already, this one resembles most the original text. The plot itself isn't changed that much despite so many other changes around it. I also think, and this is perhaps a bit unfair assessment wise, but I don't think this is the worst adaptation of The Pale Horse. I think the 2020 series was significantly worse, so that one gives this one a bit of an unfair leg up, but I do have The Pale Horse here at number 7. At number 6, and this is the last one I think is atrocious, and that is By the Pricking of My Thumbs. And unlike other adaptations, this one actually keeps the recurring characters from the novel in Tommy and Tuppence. Unfortunately, I think their portrayal is awful. Tuppence is now an alcoholic, and Tommy is just a bad husband. Miss Marple basically does everything Tommy does in the novel, which doesn't fit with her personality. I didn't feel as if the opening scenes with Mrs. Lancaster in the nursing home were as good or as chilling as they could have been. I think the sequence in the novel is fantastic, but here it just comes off as really bland. A small thing I didn't like is that they changed the names of Tommy and Tuppence's children for no reason. A lot of the plot is left intact, which is why I have this at the top of the very bad episodes, but we don't have the death of Mrs. Moody, who is now Miss Marple's friend. I also think there are some moments that improve upon the book, or at least clear up some of the issues I had with the original novel. The cryptic letter about the painting is found much earlier and is much less cryptic than it is, and now it's a moving force behind the action after Aunt Ada dies, and this just makes much more sense. A lot of the characters who were retained are fleshed out more and become more viable suspects. I also think Mrs. Lancaster's disappearance is solvable now. One of the issues I had with the novel is that the ending just sort of comes about and there are a few leaps in logic. And while I still think that is the case here, I think there are fewer gaps, and I do think you could get to the end on your own. I don't necessarily think the improvements are done well, but I appreciate the effort to solve those issues, which is why I placed By the Pricking of My Thumbs here at number 6. At number 5 is the first adaptation in this list that I don't think is a complete mess, but I don't find it particularly high quality either, and that is Endless Night. And I know this is not a popular episode from the fans, but I think this works better than any others I've talked about so far. There's a Miss Marple short story called The Case of the Caretaker, which is very similar to Endless Night, so the insertion of Miss Marple into this wasn't really a big deal for me, as I think it is for other people. However, I did feel like the addition of Miss Marple really took away from Michael Rogers' characterization. The end of the novel is such a shock because Michael is our narrator and our hero also, and we were with him for so much of the book. But here, I do feel as if a lot of the focus is now on Miss Marple, which makes Michael simply another suspect. I think he loses that sort of special quality he had in the book. It's not exactly like this, but it's not to the great extent it was in the novel. The plot is actually pretty faithful to the novel, although there are some changes. And while I think these changes are interesting, again, I think they sort of take away from the sort of roller coaster ride the novel was. In the book, all of the clues to Michael's true persona are there, but they are very subtle. In the adaptation, these hints are more strongly indicated, and I just didn't experience the shock and awe from the book. I do think, in general, everything seemed watered down, but I still feel this episode is one of the better in the series, particularly from these non Miss Marple novel adaptations, and it is enjoyable the entire time throughout, so I placed Endless Night here at number 5. At number 4 is the first short story I will talk about, and that is The Blue Geranium. And understandably, the plot had to be expanded considerably to fit the full length of the episode, and I think they do a decent job with it. The basic plot is the same. All of the characters are really fleshed out. Toby Stevens plays George Pritchard, whose character is expanded upon considerably. It's probably the best example of the show doing this in a meaningful way. Toby Stevens is a fantastic actor who has appeared in a number of Christie adaptations, and he is equally good as here as he is in Five Little Pigs and Then There Were None. In addition to George's wife Mary, there are now two other murders, and I thought both of them were well done. Typically, the higher the body count, the cheesier it gets, but I thought both of these new murders were well integrated into the plot. George is arrested for these murders and confesses to them, but Miss Marple proves him innocent. I do feel, however, as if there was too much focus on George as a suspect, that it wasn't really convincing for me, but I thought his character was brilliant. The motive has changed a little bit. Nurse Copeland is still a killer, and she still kills for money. And this is the biggest knock for me, is that her plot becomes way more convoluted. She kills Mrs. Pritchard in such a manner that frames George. That means his money goes to his brother Louis, who is married to Philippa, and she thinks she can blackmail Philippa into getting the money that way. It's not as smooth of a motive as in the original, so that places the Blue Geranium here at number 4. At number 3 is the other short story adaptation on this list, and the only short story on this list that Miss Marple originally had any direct action in, and that is Greenshaw's Folly. And this one also combines two short stories into one. It also takes considerably from the thumb mark of St. Peter, and I think these two stories molded well together. It did feel natural to me. The adaptation removes Raymond West, which is typically pretty common whenever he appears. I would have loved to see Raymond West on the screen, as I find him an interesting, although unlikable character, but Miss Marple is inserted into the story from the beginning, which I appreciated. She's in the thick of things from the start. Again, this was a short story, so there had to be a lot of additions, and I have mixed feelings about some of them, but I thought but in general, they were largely positive additions. The biggest improvement for me, however, was the rearrangement of some of the clues. Miss Marple learns a lot of these things, such as the mixed mushrooms or whatever they were, much earlier and more actively than she did in the original. In this short story, she just sort of guesses a lot, but here she's doing active sleuthing. She provides a lot more concrete information that was only vaguely hinted at in the original. I don't know how I feel about the subplots involving the orphanage funds or the kidnapping of Archie, but they do provide good backstories for a lot of suspects and provides them with a motive, so I think it's fine. Overall, I found this adaptation to be pretty strong, but a little inconsistent at times, so I placed it here at number 3. And now for the top two. And I think these episodes are fairly good, although I know they have their detractors as well, and I do have issues with them. But at number 2, I did place Toward Zero. And again, Superintendent Battle is gone, and he does have a generic replacement, but pretty much everything he does in the book, Miss Marple does here in the episode. I think this was a good novel to insert Miss Marple into. She's made a friend of Lady Tressilian, and it's already a sort of country house slash village mystery, but not really, but it works for Miss Marple. It feels like it could have been a Miss Marple story. Angus McWhirter has also been removed, which I have no problems with, as I think he's the worst part of the novel. His role is mostly given to Miss Marple, which does lead to my biggest issue with the adaptation. A lot of this part of the episode is Miss Marple learning things passively, where the whole business of McWhirter's suit being eliminated and Diana Britton having a larger role. She just rattles off a bunch of things to Miss Marple, especially about the fish smell, and I think it would have been better to have seen Miss Marple actively learn these things. Other than that, a lot of the plot is the same. They keep a lot of the small details that reveal a lot about the characters, and they leave these intact, which is something a lot of Christie adaptations dispense with for time purposes. A lot of the characters are a little more fleshed out, but keep true to the way Christie wrote them, which is something that, again, doesn't happen very often, especially in this series. Audrey and Thomas Royd become a couple at the end of the adaptation, which I think is more appropriate than her marrying Angus like she did in the novel. I think this is a pretty solid adaptation, so I place Toward Zero here at number 2. And now for the top spot. At number 1, I placed Ordeal by Innocence. And this one did make a number of changes, but I think they're largely in the right direction. A lot of that awkwardness involving the children being adopted is still present, but it's toned down considerably, and their issues with Rachel seem much less ridiculous and bizarre. Miss Marple has made a friend of Gwenda Vaughn, who is at Sunny Point to attend Gwenda and Leo's wedding. Gwenda now becomes the second murder victim, and I like this. I felt the emotion running through Miss Marple in a very similar manner to what happens to her in A Pocketful of Rye. I also just think her murder fits in better with the story than when it was Philip, like in the original novel. Jacko is hanged at the beginning of the episode, and like what happened in the Poirot adaptation of Five Little Pigs, I think this really ups the stakes, although no one in the Argyle family still really seems to care about Jacko. Bobby is a new character, and I didn't mind him. He's Jacko's twin brother, and I thought he actually contributed to the episode. Did I need him? No, but I thought he was a fascinating character. I thought the acting here was pretty good as well. Stephanie Leonidas as Hester especially stood out to me. And despite some of these more notable changes, the plot remains largely faithful. It has the same themes and events as the novel and captures the spirit of the original book. And at the end, we learn that Kirsten has been arrested, which was something that was not really explained in the book. It is a good story to add Miss Marple to, and I think it's the best non-Marple novel adaptation from the series, so I placed it here at number 1. And that's all for this video. Make sure you like and subscribe to keep up to date with the channel. I'm not going to cover the BBC Miss Marple series starring Joan Hickson because all those episodes are largely faithful and there weren't many changes made, so I just don't feel like I have a lot to say about them. Maybe one day in the future I will rank them, but not right now. Next week, I'm moving into the short story territory while I will rank every story in the Poirot Investigates collection, which I think is a pretty solid one, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.